These 12 types of canned foods are becoming harder and harder to find on store shelves, and data from 2026 shows that for some of them, the change has already become clear. USDA forecasts California clingstone peach production will fall 20% this year. A plant that once processed about 1/3 of California's cling peaches has closed. Meanwhile, canned fruit prices have risen about 7.9% from a year ago. That does not mean America is running out of canned food, but the problem often shows up before the shelf is empty. At first, it is simply fewer brands, fewer sizes, fewer choices, or a familiar product starting to appear inconsistently. And what stands out is that each can is facing a different kind of pressure. Some problems begin in the field, some at the plant, and some run into trouble right at the border before they ever make it into the store. And these are the 12 types showing the most notable signs. 12. Canned apricots. Canned apricots used to be a familiar product in the canned food aisle, especially for families that used them for baking, breakfast, or storage. Many people only realize the choices have shrunk when they actually go back to look for them. USDA forecasts California will produce about 34,000 tons of apricots in 2026, almost unchanged from the year before. So the difficulty of finding canned apricots today cannot simply be explained by a failed crop. Supermarket shelf space works almost like real estate. Every spot has to prove it deserves to stay. Peaches usually have more options. Pineapple appears in several different forms. Fruit cocktail also holds a familiar place in this section. Apricots have to compete with all of those products in a limited amount of space. When retailers streamline their assortment, smaller and less popular items can lose their spots first. And here is the number worth remembering. 34,000 tons does not sound small at all. According to USDA, apricot production today is less than half the annual average from the early 2000s. The amount of orchard acreage in production has also shrunk significantly over roughly 2 decades. That shows the production base behind canned apricots has become much smaller than it used to be. Apricots still being grown does not mean canned apricots are still easy to find on the shelf. For an apricot to become a canned product, it still needs a processor, a production line, a distribution system, and finally, a retailer willing to give it shelf space. The next time you are standing in front of the canned fruit section, look at how many spots are given to apricots compared with peaches or pineapple. Harder to find does not necessarily mean completely gone. It could go from 3 brands to 1, from several sizes to 1, or from a product that used to be available in most stores to something you have to visit another place to find. Apricots may not be scarce. What may be becoming scarcer is the space reserved for them on store shelves. 11. Canned pears. Canned pears in 2026 are showing one very clear weakness in processing capacity. California still has pear orchards producing fruit. For those pears to become canned products, the industry has to have enough facilities to receive and process them within the right window after harvest. In recent years, Del Monte had contracts for nearly 40% of the pears used for canned products in California. When Del Monte's processing facility in Modesto closed, a large volume of fruit that already had a place to go suddenly had to find a new processing destination. This is where the scale of the change becomes clearest. Pears cannot wait indefinitely after they are harvested. The remaining facilities have to have enough production lines, workers, and capacity to absorb the additional volume within the proper processing window. Pacific Coast producers took on a significant portion of the volume Del Monte used to process, helping keep operations going for this year's season. That transfer helped keep the system running. At the same time, it also made the industry more dependent on the remaining processing facilities. Picture a shipping route that once had several receiving points. When one major point disappears, the product can still keep moving if the remaining points are able to handle the extra volume. The fewer replacement points there are, the more important each remaining facility becomes. That is exactly where canned pears stand today. Growers are still harvesting. The fruit still exists. The deciding step is how many facilities still have enough capacity to take in those pears and turn them into finished products at the right time. If another major processor runs into trouble, the amount of volume that would need to be shifted somewhere else would become much more significant than before. So the question worth remembering here is very simple. There are pears, but how many places are still capable of canning them? As processing capacity becomes concentrated in fewer facilities, the path from the pear orchard to the finished product becomes narrower too. 10. Canned mushrooms. A can of mushrooms that costs only a few dollars may look like one of the simplest products in the store. But turn the can around and look at the line showing where it was produced. You may discover that this very ordinary food has traveled through a much longer international trade chain than the price on the label suggests. And in July 2026, a decision by the U.S. International Trade Commission continued to directly affect part of the supply of imported preserved mushrooms entering the United States. The agency decided to maintain anti-dumping orders on preserved mushrooms from Chile, China, India, and Indonesia. At this point, it is easy to think those products have been banned, but that is not the case. Anti-dumping orders do not close the border to mushrooms from these countries. They mean some imports continue to face additional duties intended to counter goods being sold in the United States at prices below what is determined to be fair value. Put more simply, the products can still enter the United States, but their price advantage may no longer be what it once was. And that is what matters to shoppers. A low-priced can of mushrooms often has only a small margin between production costs, shipping, importing, distribution, and the final price in the store. When an added layer of trade costs remains in place, importers and retailers have to recalculate their sourcing. They may switch to another supplier. The country of origin printed on the can may change. An imported product that once competed mainly on price may become less attractive, and the price gap between imported products and other sources may shift as well. That is how a decision made in a meeting room in Washington can eventually show up as a different price on a can at the supermarket. Sometimes a problem on the shelf begins thousands of miles away from the shelf. What is important is that these measures are not an entirely new policy that appeared in 2026. They have existed before and are reviewed under a regular process. After this latest review, the U.S. International Trade Commission concluded that removing the orders would likely lead to a recurrence of dumping and injury to U.S. producers, so the measures were kept in place. For shoppers, the lesson here is not that canned mushrooms are about to disappear. What is more worth watching is how the supply of a low-priced product can change because of trade decisions shoppers almost never see. The next time you pick up a can of mushrooms, look at the country of origin. If a few months later you see the same kind of product, but the country of production has changed, or the price gap between different sources starts to widen, that may be the trace of a new sourcing process taking place far from the store. And that is what makes canned mushrooms completely different from the previous two items. Canned apricots are under pressure because of shelf space. Canned pears depend on processing capacity. But with canned mushrooms, a product that seems very domestic on the shelf can actually depend heavily on international trade law. But the next item raises the stakes another level. Here, regulations do not just change the cost of a shipment. They can cause the shipment itself to be held before it is allowed to continue into the U.S. market. 9. Canned shrimp. A container of canned shrimp may have already crossed an entire ocean, arrived at a U.S. port, and be only a few steps away from the distribution system. But that journey can still stop right at the border. On June 24, 2026, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration updated Import Alert 16-22 for canned shrimp from Thailand associated with decomposition. What matters is that this alert does not mean all canned shrimp from Thailand is banned from entering the United States. The FDA can use a mechanism called detention without physical examination for companies and products covered by the alert. Put simply, when a shipment covered by this alert arrives in the United States, the importer may have to provide evidence showing that the product meets FDA requirements before the shipment is released. This is the most important point. The container has already arrived. The product has already been made. The cost of shipping it across the ocean has already been paid. But at the final step, the shipment still has to prove that it qualifies to continue into the market. A tariff can make a product more expensive, but a food safety decision can cause the shipment itself to stop until compliance is demonstrated. For a specialized imported product like canned shrimp, delays affecting some shipments can directly affect how quickly supply is replenished. Distributors have to wait longer. Importers may have to provide additional documentation. And supply from companies covered by the alert may take more time before it can continue moving through the market. This does not prove that canned shrimp is in short supply across the entire United States, but it does show a very real risk. The supply only truly becomes ready-to-sell merchandise after it passes the final control point at the border. For products that depend on affected imports, border delays can make the pace of restocking more inconsistent. That is why canned shrimp deserves a place on this list. A can may have already completed almost its entire journey to the shopper, but it still may not be allowed to continue. And the next item is fragile in a different way. It is already expensive, specialized, and has little ability to absorb any additional disruption. 8. Canned crab meat. Canned crab meat already occupies a very different position from common canned fish. Higher prices, lower consumption, and a narrower supplier base make this segment more sensitive when the market faces disruptions. The FDA is still maintaining Import Alert 16-25 for processed crab meat from Thailand. This alert is an example of how part of the imported supply still has to meet strict control requirements before it can enter the U.S. market. But the most important thing to remember about crab meat is not one specific alert. It is how this segment is structured. Picture a bridge. A bridge with 6 supports still has several points carrying the load if one support has a problem. But a bridge relying on only 2 or 3 main supports is much more sensitive to the same shock. Canned crab meat works in a similar way. A common product like tuna usually has a larger scale of consumption and a broader supply network. When one source runs into trouble, the system is more likely to find an equivalent replacement. Crab meat is different. A narrower supplier base makes it harder to replace a source that is delayed, loses the ability to supply, or runs into quality control problems. Importers do not just need to find a similar product, but also the right level of quality, volume, and cost. This is exactly the problem of low redundancy in the supply base. When a market has many suppliers and many production regions, a disruption can be spread across several different sources. In a small segment, losing or delaying just one important source already represents a larger share of the total volume that needs to be replaced. So the impact of the same shock is not the same for every type of canned food. With a product that has a broad network, the system has more ways to adjust itself. With canned crab meat, the margin of safety is narrower. That is also something shoppers should pay attention to. if this is a product their family regularly uses. The stability of the source, the price, and the ability to keep buying the same product over time can tell you more than a single look at whether the shelf is still full. The image of the bridge is the easiest way to remember this section. The fewer supports there are, the more important each remaining support becomes. And that is why specialized products often show cracks first, simply because they do not have many backup layers to absorb the shock. The next item raises a completely different question. Does the label on the can actually prove the product's origin? 7. Imported canned tuna. The next time you pick up a can of tuna, turn it around. Do not look at the price first. Look for two things: where it was produced and the words, "dolphin safe." Because with imported tuna, the information on the package is not just there for shoppers to reference. It also has to match evidence showing that the product meets U.S. regulations. In March 2026, NOA Fisheries announced the results of 2 investigations involving imported tuna from Mexico, carrying improper dolphin-safe claims. One case involved 74 shipments, equal to about 2.2 million pounds of canned and pouched tuna. During the investigation, NOA also stopped another 46,080 cans of tuna that were on their way into the U.S. market and sent them back to Mexico. Those numbers bring us to the core issue: traceability. Fish can be caught in one part of the ocean, processed in one country, packed at another facility, and then imported into the United States. What matters is that each step leaves enough data to confirm the claims printed on the package. For the dolphin-safe designation, NOAA requires the product to meet conditions set by U.S. law. The tuna tracking program uses information about harvesting, processing, and importing to verify whether those claims are valid. A very small detail on the package therefore becomes part of an entire verification system. Right at the store shelf, shoppers can check where the product was made and the information printed on the can. But the core requirement remains very clear. The label has to match the traceability data from the product's entire journey. With imported tuna, having the product is not enough. The ability to prove its origin and verify what is claimed on the package is what determines whether the product can continue moving through U.S. commerce. 6. Canned sardines. There are cans of sardines that a family buys for years. Same size, same flavor, same place of production. Then one day, that exact product no longer shows up. With imported sardines, sometimes the reason can come down to just one single processing facility overseas. On May 19, 2026, the FDA listed Cofisa in Portugal, along with canned sardines under Import Alert 16-120. The agency said an evaluation found serious deviations in the company's HACCP food safety control system, including an incomplete hazard analysis and certain control limits and corrective measures that had not been fully established. What matters is the level of dependence. A major brand may have several production facilities or several alternative sources, but a specific line of Portuguese sardines can sometimes be tied to exactly one cannery. If that facility runs into compliance problems, the specific SKU produced there can face obstacles in continuing to enter the United States until the company shows that it has corrected the conditions that led to the alert. And shoppers sometimes notice this before any nationwide data does. You go back to the store. Sardines are still there. But the kind you have been buying for years is not. It may be the exact size you like, the exact type of oil, the exact flavor, or the exact brand your family has used for a long time. The entire sardine market does not have to run into a problem at the same time. Just one affected production facility can be enough to disrupt a specific product line if that product does not have an equivalent alternative source. This is exactly what makes small imported SKUs especially vulnerable. You do not lose sardines. You lose the exact can you have been buying for years. With products closely tied to one specific factory, just one problem at that facility can be enough to make a familiar choice disappear from the place where you usually find it. Canned mackerel. A can of mackerel can sit in the pantry for years and still remain remarkably stable. But that long shelf life does not naturally come from the can itself. It comes from precise processing techniques before the can is sealed. Many canned mackerel products fall into the category of low-acid canned foods, where temperature, processing time, package integrity, and sanitary conditions have to be controlled very carefully. In 2026, the FDA listed a low-acid canned mackerel product from a foreign processor after finding serious deviations in its food safety system. But that case is only the starting point for understanding something more important. Canned fish is not simply putting fish into a can and closing the lid. Picture the can like a safe. When the safe is designed and locked correctly, it protects what is inside very effectively. But its reliability does not come from the door looking strong. It comes from the locking mechanism inside. Canned mackerel works the same way. On the outside, a can may look completely normal, but the product's long-term stability depends on the parameters carried out during production. Enough heat, enough processing time, a proper seam seal, and processing conditions maintained to the required standard. That technical layer is what allows the product to last a long time without refrigeration before opening. And that is also why regulators are especially strict about deviations in the process. If a manufacturer cannot demonstrate the required processing conditions, supply from that facility can be stopped until the technical problems are resolved. The point to remember is very simple. Long shelf life is the result of precision in production. A sealed can does not automatically guarantee everything. What matters is what happened before it was closed. With canned mackerel, a long shelf life is not magic. It is the result of engineering, and engineering is only reliable when every parameter is carried out correctly. 4. Canned mixed fruit. Canned mixed fruit looks very simple at first glance. Open the can, and you just see different kinds of fruit cut up and mixed together. But from a supply standpoint, this is actually one of the most complex products on the list. A can of peaches mainly depends on one primary ingredient stream. Mixed fruit has to combine several kinds of fruit in the same recipe, and each one has to meet requirements for quality, size, harvest timing, and suitability for use in the final product. Del Monte still sells several lines of mixed fruit with different fruit combinations. That shows that a finished can is really the meeting point of several separate ingredient sources. Picture a meal that requires 5 ingredients. If just one simple ingredient is missing, you can easily replace it. But when the entire recipe depends on several ingredients at the same time, each additional ingredient creates another point of dependence. That is the complexity factor. Pears may still be available. Peaches may still be available. Pineapple and grapes may be too. But the manufacturer still has to bring all the necessary ingredients together at the same time with the right quality and specifications to create a product with consistent flavor, texture, and ingredient proportions. The difficult part is coordination. A disruption in just one ingredient source can force the manufacturer to change the proportions, switch sources, or adjust the production plan. If 2 or 3 ingredients come under pressure at the same time, the level of complexity rises very quickly. That is what makes mixed fruit different from a can containing only one kind of fruit. Each ingredient does not just add another flavor, it also brings its own season, supply source, and set of requirements. So the more ingredients that have to come together in the same recipe, the more points where a small change can spread across the entire product. A can of mixed fruit may look like the simplest product on the shelf, but behind the scenes, it is one of the products that requires the most pieces to fit together. Tutriti, canned wild Alaska salmon. To understand Alaska salmon in 2026, do not just look at how many fish are being caught. Look at how more and more production is moving through fewer and fewer processing companies. Seafood Source says Alaska's salmon industry entered this year's season after a period of major consolidation. Silver Bay Seafoods expanded rapidly through multiple acquisitions of facilities and assets, making the state's processing operations more concentrated than before. That is exactly the risk of concentration. Picture a highway network. When many companies are operating, fish from the dock have several different routes to keep moving. If one facility runs into trouble, production can still be shifted elsewhere. But when the number of major companies falls, there are fewer alternative routes too. 25 years ago, Alaska went through a similar period, when the number of major salmon processors fell from about 15 to 20 down to 6 to 8. In recent years, that concentration process has continued again. Seafood Source also reported that Silver Bay temporarily halted processing operations in Cordova for the rest of 2026 and shifted production to other facilities such as Valdez and Seward. What matters here is that production can still be redirected. But every time one processing point disappears or is absorbed into a larger network, the system loses another backup route. A more concentrated industry can operate more efficiently under normal conditions. But when weather, catch volumes, labor, or a major facility runs into trouble, the same shock will affect a larger share of the entire system. That is what makes canned Alaska salmon worth watching. Not because the fish in the ocean suddenly disappear, but because fewer and fewer companies stand between the fishing dock and the can on the shelf. The fewer alternative routes there are, the more important each remaining point becomes. 2. Canned clingstone peaches. To understand why canned clingstone peaches are worth watching in 2026, you have to look back more than 20 years. In the 1990s, California had an average of about 30,000 acres of bearing clingstone peaches. By 2025, that acreage had fallen to only about 13,600 acres. In 2026, USDA estimates only about 10,100 acres remain. This is not a decline that started this year. USDA says clingstone peach acreage has declined in most years since the mid-2000s. This year's production makes that trend even clearer. California is forecast to produce about 170,000 tons, down 20% from the year before. And about 95% of these peaches are used by the canning industry. But acreage and production are only the first two layers. Just as the raw material base continues to shrink, California also lost a facility that once processed nearly 1/3 of the state's clingstone peaches. Del Monte's Modesto plant once took in about 70,000 tons of these peaches before closing in April 2026. Then there is the long-term consumer data. USDA says per capita availability of canned peaches in the United States was once about 4.5 pounds in the early 2000s. In recent years, that number has fallen to only about 2.2 pounds, nearly cut in half. When you put all of that together, the picture looks very different. Less growing acreage, lower production, weaker long-term demand, and a major processing facility is gone. This is structural contraction. It did not appear in a single season, and it is also difficult to reverse with just one good harvest. This year did not create this trend. This year simply made a trend lasting more than 2 decades harder to ignore. With canned clingstone peaches getting harder to find, can begin long before shoppers see an empty shelf. It begins when growing acreage, industry capacity, and the amount of product available for each American all shrink over time. 1. Canned beef and corned beef. A can of corned beef on a supermarket shelf may seem very far removed from America's cattle pastures. But to understand the pressure on this product in 2026, you have to trace the entire path all the way back to the cattle herd. On the first day of January this year, USDA recorded about 86.2 million cattle and calves in the United States, with the number of beef cows down to only about 27.6 million. Another 1% lower than the year before. By July, the number of beef cows was still 1% below the same period a year earlier. Reuters described the cattle supply serving the beef industry as being at its lowest level in about 75 years. The consequences have gone far beyond the farm. In August, Tyson Foods announced it would close facilities in Illinois and Utah while selling its plant in Washington. Operations are being concentrated more heavily in Nebraska, Kansas, and Texas. The company expects its beef business could lose between $500 million and $650 million in fiscal year 2026. The contradiction is right there. Americans are still buying beef, but processors are having to compete for a limited supply of cattle at higher costs. Reuters says sharply rising cattle prices are putting pressure on processing companies' profits. The chain of effects is very clear. A smaller cattle herd, higher raw material costs, processor margins being squeezed, production facilities being closed or consolidated, and processed food manufacturers competing for the same beef supply. That is where canned beef begins to come under pressure. You cannot can an ingredient that is becoming more expensive and scarcer, while still assuming the can will always keep the same price and the same variety it had before. This does not predict that corned beef will disappear, but when the underlying ingredient itself is in a historic supply shortage cycle, shelf-stable beef products that compete heavily on price will find it increasingly difficult to maintain both low prices and a wide range of choices. And that is why the number one item does not really begin with the can. It begins with the fact that America now has too few cattle for the entire beef industry to operate as easily as it did before. An empty shelf is usually the final stage. The first signals are much smaller and very easy to overlook. A familiar brand disappears. A size is gone. The product's origin changes. Shelf space shrinks. There are fewer promotions, or the store gradually keeps only the most basic choices. Those are the changes worth watching. The reasonable response is not panic buying either. If your family actually uses these products, keep an extra 1 or 2 units. Use the older items first. Replenish gradually, and do not stockpile foods you normally do not eat. You do not need to wait until the shelf is empty to start paying attention. What matters is recognizing when the path that brings a product to the shelf is gradually becoming narrower, while everything around it still looks completely normal.